Hi there, my name is Christina Plauché, and this is my presentation on form input validation for CIT 230. Form validation is not just about data. It's about format too, getting the data formatted correctly. It needs to be in the right format so the input doesn't break the app, so users fill it out correctly, so users don't get frustrated and quit. We don't want that, do we? What is form validation? Go to any popular site with a registration form and you will notice that they give you feedback when you don't enter your data in the format they're expecting. You'll get messages like, "This field is required. You can't leave this field blank. Please enter your phone number in the format XXX. It wants 3 numbers followed by a dash followed by 4 numbers. Please enter a valid email address. The thing you've entered doesn't look like an email address." When you enter data, the form checks to see if it's correct. If it's correct, the application allows the data to be submitted to the server and usually saved in a database. If not, it gives you an error message to explain what you've done wrong. Why? Why does this happen? Well, it's important that the application works after you've submitted the data. So funky data in wrong places or wrong format or missing data makes your application not work the way you need it to. Also, it helps protect users from themselves, kind of, like, for example, weak passwords. Also, security. Hackers can misuse unprotected forms to damage the application by entering malicious code into the form field. I'm in a security class also, and we're learning all about this. It's super important. Another note is that at my company, when developers are interviewed for a position, this is one of the first things they're asked about. Not that they're asked about form validation directly, they're asked about how to prevent certain types of attacks, and form validation is part of that answer. So this is an important thing. So what are some types of form validation? Well, first we have client side. This occurs in the browser. It's quick, it's instant. We also have server side, which this occurs on the server after the data has been submitted, and it validates before the data goes into the database. It's not quite as quick or as user-friendly, but it's also an important part of it. So you can also have a mix of both. In the real world, developers use a combination of client-side and server-side validation. I'm sure we will too. Also, there's built-in form validation with HTML5. So we're going to talk about that a little bit and talk about some of these validation attributes. These attributes specify rules for the form input. For example, the minimum and maximum length of the data, whether it needs to be a number, an email address, a URL, or something else. Also a pattern that it must match. And if the entered data follows all those rules, it's considered valid. If not, it's considered invalid and it will give an error. So when it's valid, the element will match the valid CSS pseudo class and apply that style to the valid elements, and the browser will submit the form. If it's invalid, the element will match the invalid CSS pseudo class, apply that style to the invalid elements, and the browser will block the form and show an error message. All right, let's look at the required attribute. You'll often see this highlighted with a little red asterisk on forms. And let's look at what that's going to look like. You can see here that this required is all that you need to put in the input field. But let's look at what you need for a form. So you can see here we've used the form HTML, and then we have label, input, and button. So there's 4 things here: form, label, input, and button. And for the required attributes, you're going to put that on the input field, that the input is required. And you can see the CSS here. I made our little box red dashed with the invalid CSS just to make it stand out a little bit. So you don't need for the required field, you don't need the equals anything, it's just simply required. And then we have the pattern attribute, which this is a regular expression. You'll see regex used often, and this is what this means, regular expression. And this is a pattern used to match character combinations in text strings. Here's an example of that. For example, if we wanted to ask, do you want banana or cherry, we can put in the HTML pattern equals banana and then the pipe delimited cherry. And then if you were to enter grape into this field, it would give an error according to whatever we said in the CSS. Whoops. And just a note, the text area does not support a pattern attribute. So other elements such as like email or URL do not need a pattern attribute. All right, the entry length. This is something that is often needed as well. So if it's a text field, then you're going to use the values of min length and max length. And if it's a number field, you will use min and max. Error messages. Now this is interesting. The error messages are controlled by the browser. There's not much you can do with the style with CSS. It can only be changed with JavaScript. So if you want to take control over the look and feel of those native error messages, or if you want to deal with browsers that don't support HTML's built-in form validation, you have to use JavaScript. You can write your own JavaScript, or you can use their the built-in API. So the built-in API is the constraint validation API, and more browsers are supporting this, and it's becoming more reliable. This API consists of a set of methods and properties available on each form element. This is beyond the scope of what we're going to cover in this presentation, but I thought it would be helpful to know. I'm sure we're going to be writing custom messages before long, and that we will need this. And lastly, I wanted to mention a word about form design. As I was researching this presentation, I came across some helpful information about how to design forms so that they are easy for customers to fill out. Customers really struggle with forms sometimes, so the way they're designed makes a big difference. And the main thing is that alignment matters. Top aligned label forms are the fastest for users to read, and they have the highest success rate, so the users don't quit before they're done. And then if you couple that with the primary action button that's in line with the form, you've got a winner for your form, a greater chance of success. So even in this slide with the button in Japanese, we know exactly where to click. That's why the designer made the image this way, so we can see that even though we can't read the words, we know where we need to click to keep moving forward. All right, in conclusion, always help the user to input correct data by validating your input format, using explicit error messages exactly where the error occurs, and align the form for the most intuitive use. I wanted to share also some resources with Mozilla, the presentation, and some more information about the constraint validation. And thank you so much for watching.